Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space. Today we're talking about storytelling in travel photography, which no better time of year. The kids are out of school. We're all starting to plan our summer vacations. Peter Lee, Andrew Lai joining us from Canon. Huge thank you to them for hosting today's event. Guys, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Derek. Happy to be here.
Always good to
Today we're
have you
talking about
guys on.
storytelling. Welcome back to the Travel
Yes,
Space.
and we're going to have Andrew in the background answering your questions. So we got a little tandem going today. So I'll turn it over to the guys to address storytelling in travel photography. To all of you joining us out there, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop it into the comments section on YouTube. I'll see you guys in a bit for some Q&A.
So hopefully this looks okay at this point. And if there's anything wrong, just let me know. My name is Peter Lee. I'm a Canon product educator. I'm based in California. So just at home in Sacramento, super hot today. And we'll be talking about what I think of as travel photography. Just as a little bit of background, I made this class before COVID, before all these online classes became so popular during COVID. And it was just about, well, it's like, what can we do? And about some things you love. Because in the end, I happen to, just like my coworker, Andrew, I happen to travel a lot for work. The boss pays me to travel to support dealers just like B&H and customers across the country. But a lot of you just don't have that ability to do that. I get that. So some of you may travel for work, or most likely this time of year, especially, it'll be family vacations and also just maybe your own trips, just a little bit of relaxation on your own. But I would always suggest things that you personally enjoy. So you can experiment at home, and that's kind of what we'll talk about today. Um, Part of travel photography will involve scouting. I'll go over a little bit. This is part one of two. So there'll be a second session in the first week of August, and I'll talk more about virtual scouting because that is a big deal these days. You can do a lot more than you could in the past before all this fancy internet stuff. And one of the best ways I've found to kind of figure out what's going on wherever you're going is to talk to a local photographer that you may know, or maybe introduce yourself to a local photographer over social media and get some ideas about, it's like, I like this, I'm going there, you happen to live in that area. What would you suggest I visit because I like this sort of thing? But in the end, it's always about what you personally enjoy. So hopefully we'll show you some examples of that. In terms of planning, uh, I would always, because most travel photography involves something outside, usually. So if you're traveling to a place, you're going to inevitably do some sightseeing, visit the normal places. And much of that might be outside. Because it's outside, you're at the mercy of whatever weather there may be at the time. I would always suggest having some kind of plan B. So if you are outside, this is what we're planning, but the weather's not particularly cooperative, it's always good to have some alternate plan at the same area. Okay. So oftentimes people ask me, it's like, what would I suggest as a camera to travel with for travel photography? At some point or another, I've traveled without every single current Canon mirrorless camera and all past DSLRs, literally going back 10, 15 years. And I just generally suggest bringing the best tool for the job. So I don't have any examples in here because that's not the point, especially in the first session. But if you're going to safari in Africa, I just talked to a friend who just did that. You bring the best tool that you feel comfortable carrying for that job. And so in some cases, that could be a big camera with a big lens. And for some other people, they don't want that. They don't need that. And they'll bring a smaller camera and a smaller lens to do a similar job. And they're okay with that. And that's perfectly fine. What I do want to talk about are some options because it is so commonly asked about. It's like, well, I do want something smaller. I might have something bigger that I might use when I'm at home or sometimes for work. But when I travel, I would prefer something smaller because no one's paying me to take these pictures. They're for my own personal pleasure. They're to document our trip, a lot of times with family or friends. And it's something where having something more compact smaller and lighter becomes a big deal to them. So this is an example of current Canon full frame mirrorless RF mount, and that's the R8. It's the smallest Canon full frame camera that we make. And just to give you an idea, to compare to a classic DSLR, and that's a 5D Mark IV, it is almost half the weight. It's pretty amazing. So this is one of the substantial advantages of going mirrorless, is that the camera itself, the mechanical elements are less complicated. The camera body can be smaller and more compact. And then the whole package, especially if you don't put a big lens on it, can be rather travel friendly for those of you looking for smaller packaging. If someone wants to go even smaller, and that means crop, I'm comparing to an older Rebel, like a Rebel T7i. Something I might suggest would be something like an R50, which is basically a modern Canon mirrorless Rebel, substantially lighter and still smaller. And that's the whole point of these kinds of products. If someone needs something even more compact with a fixed lens, maybe something like a PowerShot. That's never a bad option. Oftentimes I'll just travel with it in a jacket pocket as a secondary camera, so I don't have to use the phone all the time. Okay. Lenses. So Canon has been adding quite a few crop dedicated lenses for RF mount. An RFS 10 to 18, ultra wide. So this is a relatively new lens. It's very similar in size to the RFS 18 to 45, which is basically the kit lens you would get. Normally, if you buy like an R50 or an R10, that's your typical lens you might get with that in a package in the same box. If you want or have the desire to have a more all-in-one lens, I'd highly recommend an RFS 18 to 150. So you get something relatively wide, and you get something moderately telephoto. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, especially for what I would describe as day trips if you're going out and about. So if you want to leave the rest of your gear, you might bring in a hotel room or not necessarily swap lenses all the time. Having a more all-in-one lens is very practical for that. If you're okay carrying the extra lens as a long telephoto, then we have an RFS 55 to 210. So these are all relatively small, lightweight lenses. They're all for crop. So just be aware of that. For lenses that are both full frame or crop. So these lenses all cover full frame sensors. So you can use them on a full frame camera. These are the focal lengths on a full frame camera. Something super wide would be something like 16. So it's very similar in size to the modern Nifty 50, an RF50 1.8. Very small, compact, not too expensive, but very approachable if you're more casually interested in ultra wide, either for it could be architecture, it could be landscape, it could be night sky. Night sky is something that's technically a little bit more difficult. Oftentimes you're working with a camera that you can't see very well on a tripod. You don't do it all the time. This might be a good option for you. Or if you're looking for something super compact physically, so you don't have to physically take a lens off a camera and still pack it in a relatively small camera bag, there is a 28 millimeter prime pancake. That is an f2.8 lens. 35 is very classic for a prime. It's personally the focal length I would use on a full frame camera. For general photography, if it was a non-zooming lens, I would personally use 35. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to capture something wide. And if you need to crop in a little bit, you crop in a little bit. It's no big deal. Okay. If you want something that is going to be more all-in-one, Canon full frame, that is going to be a 24 to 240. It's physically not so small anymore. It does cover full frame, but it's a 10 times zoom that goes out to 24 wide for full frame. So it does give you that all-in-one functionality if you don't want to swap lenses so much and you're okay with a physically bigger lens. All right. So getting beyond the gear, I think this part is kind of cool. So Canon currently has a trinity. So ultra wide zoom, a standard zoom, and a long zoom that are f4, a higher end glass. So something a step above like a kit lens or the basic lens you would get for the functionality of it. So these are, I think, very appropriate for travel, especially if you don't need a 2.8 lens, like a fast lens. Don't necessarily need it, but I might value size. So there's some really good options. I would say, especially if you look at 14 to 35, that does accept screw-in filters on it. So 14 wide, accepting just regular filters, really cool. And something that it was really not possible in the past on SLR side with EF mount lenses. And then 7200 f4 that is considerably shorter than the EF mount version. Just makes it much easier to pack. And these are all good quality optics. I've brought lots of different lenses, and I'll tell you pretty much. I'll show you all the pictures, and I'll tell you exactly what lens I use for them. So you'll see some exotic things, especially when I'm closer to home. So as I told you, my hometown is Sacramento, California. I remade this class basically when COVID started, and they asked me, it's like, well, what are some classes you can do online that people might enjoy? So it's like, well, I can repurpose my travel class so that we kind of start off with things that are not far, because a lot of people are still hesitant traveling very far, and or lots of faraway places are still kind of closed to travelers coming from abroad. And it was a big deal. So let's do something close to home that we get more comfortable with, especially if you're practicing with things. So this is an example of kind of a basic way of virtual scouting. So I don't have to do this because it's home, but if you're visiting my hometown, this is something you might try. And that's because, well, there are some landmarks that are very recognizable to anyone who's lived here, worked here, maybe gone to school here. If they've lived here a while, if you see a picture of something like Tower Bridge, downtown Sacramento, it's like, okay, I know what that is. You don't even have to tell me. I just see it in the background. And then it's like, oh, I know that represents Sacramento because it's the only place that looks exactly like that. So this is a good example of virtual scouting, but virtual scouting can get you close. It's kind of like horseshoes and hand grenades. It gets you close, but it's hard to be precise sometimes because the actual position you have to get to actually take a picture, oftentimes that is off the road. That's not going to be on a road. And you're going to have a hard time seeing exactly where that is. But at least you get some idea. And this is what I do for anything farther away. If I don't know exactly where it is, I'll do some virtual scouting. And this is a normal tool to do that. So this is the classic picture. I would describe it as the classic picture of Sacramento that has nothing to do with the state capital. So for those of you who don't know, Sacramento also happens to be the state capital of California. And this is what I would always describe it as, like a bucket list picture. It is a postcard picture. Someone else has taken this picture already, of course, and that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So because it's my hometown, it gives me a lot of flexibility to do a couple different things, and you'll see it throughout this presentation. Now, one, it gives me an opportunity to go at very different times of day or different seasons, different times of the year, and also allows me to choose different lenses. So this is a very normal combination lens-wise. So it's back in the day, I took this on a 5D with a 24-70. 24-70 is super flexible. If I had to only bring one lens to do this type of picture, that's probably the lens I would bring. Just because, hey, this is the first time I ever went there. It's true. This picture was the first time I ever went there. It's like, I'm not sure where I can stand. So if I'm not sure where I can stand, having some zoom gives you some more flexibility that way. But being my hometown, it's very easy for me to choose sunset timing. So not too difficult. Just need to find parking, find somewhere to walk over, and then find exactly the viewpoint you're looking for the composition you want. So we're just facing out west here. But because it's my hometown, you can do something a little bit different because this will be winter. So winter, Central Valley, California, you oftentimes get lots and lots of ground fog in nighttime. So this one's probably about midnight. Got off an airplane, passing by, lots of fog. It's just a different type of picture. And then you can really expose yourself when it's your own hometown, wherever that may be. You can expose yourself to different seasons, different weather patterns, or potentially events. Very timely. So this was 4th of July many years ago, and a much different lens, a much more exotic lens. This is a tilt shift lens. And it's not a normal lens that if you don't know where to stand or you don't know where to go to an event, I would never bring this type of lens. So this is a very specialty lens, and I would only ever bring it if you wanted to either experiment with it or you knew exactly what you were doing. So you know where to go, you know how things frame at that focal length because it doesn't zoom and you're manually focusing, but you can take advantage of special lens that are home. So fireworks this weekend, some of you might be traveling, some other of you might be staying at home. If you plan to take fireworks, I would go early because the locals who know where to go will start camping out fairly early for the best spots to take fireworks pictures. So I would always just go early. Otherwise it gets very crowded to do that. Another classic postcard picture. This is the California State Capitol. The set of roses here, they don't currently exist because of all the construction. So time changes, so things change. The water fountain hasn't run here in years, so even I don't have a good picture of water fountain because it's actually a ring of yellow roses that are around a water fountain that should be running. So if you look at really, really old postcard pictures of the state capitol, you'll see a water fountain that's running with roses with the front of the Capitol building framing behind. But because it's home, this is the other thing you can totally take advantage of. If there are other special events, so this is when they used to run the Tour of California, it used to be a top level road race, multi-stage. California went a whole week, but at least one of those days it would start or finish at least. So usually it would start or finish one of those days, and I would just show up. I'd just show up and take pictures, and you could do something different and frame a subject that is you're very familiar with, but you're going back to reframe it with something else in mind. And especially if there are things going on, you can totally take advantage of that. Old picture. So this one I busted out. So I haven't looked at this one. I took this image many years ago on a tilt shift lens because yeah, I know where to stand to take a picture with a tilt shift lens. But people got out of my way. It's just fine because I've got a big camera, it's on a tripod, it's got a expensive looking lens on it. It's like, oh, we need to get out of your way. That's fine. You don't need to, but I'm in a public space. You don't actually need to do that. It's no big deal, but classic viewpoint, but alternate. So more of a 3/4 viewpoint. A lot of buildings, for those of you who like architecture, want to take more, or maybe learn more about how to take good architecture pictures, strongly recommend. Corners are very strong. So front facades that are flat are very classic. Nothing wrong with that. Oftentimes they're designed to look good. There's a lot of symmetry involved. Corners are very strong. So when you get a corner towards your viewpoint, it can give you a very strong framing for your subject for a lot of buildings. Different time of day, same building, but so early that you can get a better silhouette. And so which means it's going to be summer, like this time of year, like right now. I think I actually literally took this in either late June or early July years ago. Rebel, nothing really fancy going on here, just to show you could do it. So oftentimes people back in the day, that would be a classic travel camera. You might have a fancier, bigger camera that you would use more regularly, either for personal enjoyment or if it's for work. But if you travel, you may not want to bring something so big. Yeah, I get that. So here you're facing east, sun is rising to the northeast because it's such a long day. Get there early enough, it's easy to get something that's a little more silhouetted. And then the statues are the relevant things here. Or something more abstract. So it's literally the same subject. And this is often overlooked. When something is seen by you regularly over years, because you've lived there for many years, I feel like I've been there before. I've seen all there is to see, but maybe not. There are oftentimes lots of interesting compositions you can generate by just having a different viewpoint on the subject. So this is literally the tile in front of the front entrance. You can't even use the front doors anymore because of the way security is. You're forced into a particular entrance. So I used to be able to go in and out of the Capitol building this way. You just can't do it anymore. Lighting is not fancy. So this is the middle of the summer. It's really hot that day. I remember this. Lighting's low in the afternoon. It's just the actual highlights of the sun, late afternoon coming through the columns with tile work in black and white. Patterns are always fun for composition. And then this one, you can't even do this picture anymore. I used to do it. It was very cool. 14 millimeter on full frame used to be crazy wide. You couldn't get anything wider without fisheye. So you couldn't see side to side any wider without fisheye. So 14 used to be the widest I could get. And so I have a couple pictures like that from way back in the day. So this is a statue of Columbus that used to be under the rotunda. Rotundas are one of my personal kind of bucket list favorite things. I always like to get as many rotundas as possible, especially from state capitals around the country. So lots and lots of fun. Different point of view. So wide lenses, always in terms of composition, you can do lots of fun things with them. If you're not as well practiced with them, it's a great opportunity to use it when you're close to home. And then you'll feel more comfortable when you travel with something like this. It just accentuates the size of any part of the subject that will be closer to you, literally, in the foreground. So the statue just looks much bigger relative to the rotunda than it actually is when you're standing there looking at it with your own eyes. This is what you see today. Yeah, back in the day, I could never get underneath because the statue was literally right underneath this thing. you could get kind of close, but because you could never get underneath, you could never get perfect circles. So this is very modern with a very modern lens, a much more modern lens these days. But this is a good example of revisiting something older. Something might have changed. So in this case, something very much changed over the course of a decade, more than a decade now. And you might be able to do something different that you couldn't do before. So it's about revisiting things that are close to you with a different viewpoint, or maybe a different lens, or maybe you're a little bit more experienced than you used to be. Like I'm a better photographer than I was 10, 15 years ago, for sure. And just taking advantage of that experience will get you some more interesting compositions that are not too far from you. This is still, it's the actual park grounds of Capitol Mall behind the state capitol far to the east. And this, I don't need to tell you what it is, but you can kind of read it. By reading and then looking, you can kind of figure out what the whole point of this is. And that's literally the whole point of the composition. People often ask us, how do you do this kind of a picture? Because if you stand there, you look at it, it doesn't look like this. So how do you do it? You just need a super wide lens. And then you just need the camera. The lens point of view needs to be close to the foreground. And in this case, the foreground is what's on the ground, literally in front of you. When you get the camera close to that, so in this case, the plaque where it says South Vietnam, 1959 to 1975, the camera is like a foot away. So super, super close. And that's what lets you generate this kind of a picture. So pretty straightforward. So it's just a long walk to the east to get there. To the east of this, so literally 50 feet away, there is an international rose garden. This time of year, it's probably not looking so great just because it's smoking hot. It's been smoking hot for a little bit now, and it's not going to do so well without a lot of watering. Lots of roses. So lots and lots of roses, and with the appropriate lens. So whenever I take pictures of flowers, my preferred lens is always some kind of macro lens because I want some flexibility to focus closer. And that's really what that's about. Or if I go downtown, one of the biggest attractions, just because of the history of Sacramento, would be Gold Rush. So this is the original origin of Gold Rush, Sutter's Fort. I'm not going to show you that because it's not very photogenic. So I'm not going to show you Sutter's Fort, but I'll show you Delta King. So this used to be actual transportation along the Sacramento River, up and down the Sacramento River. These days, it's just a hotel and restaurant these days. So it's something very historical. Nothing wrong with that. This is just right next to the bridge. So this is all very condensed in old downtown Sacramento, along with this stuff. I mean, it's very much like anything you would expect out of any kind of more touristy area. Like this time of year, it's super touristy. It's back to being Old Sac, being something you visit. And you get a lot of tourists there, and you do a totally different composition back in the day. Long lens, just these are some places you might visit while you're down there, or abstraction. I think one of the things that people often overlook would be, especially a lot of people probably interested in landscape photography, and I quite get that. And that's because I would say it's the single most popular form of enthusiast hobbyist photography these days is probably landscape photography. What are you told? So you're told oftentimes, hey, go shoot during golden hour. That means sunset, sunrise. Less to do during, midday when you have a lot of shadows. When you have man-made structure, when you have lots of architecture to play with, shadows become super interesting. And that's all this is. So this is still just Old Sac, shadows from the railing of an old staircase from 19th century. Just the way they lay. It just looks interesting. That's really all it is. But it's very much part of, this is still Old Sac, just black and white these days. Just escape. These are just escape stairs, fire escape. Just one of the original buildings from 19th century, all about shadows. It's always more interesting because of the way man-made structures are, just to look how shadows play with the structure throughout the day. You'll find lots and lots of interesting compositions, especially show up with the subject at a different time of day. You'll see a lot of interesting things. Way back when, I didn't do tons of what I would describe as real wildlife photography. I've been doing more and more. Modern mirrorless cameras are very easy. I would describe as relatively easy to get pictures in focus of subjects that have been back in the day. It was more challenging, realistically, to take lots of pictures of wildlife. You have a lot more misses and then fewer hits. These days, a lot more hits and a lot more situations where you don't really miss focus so much. This is just plain zoo. So for me, it was trying the new autofocus system of modern mirrorless, being able to subject detect an animal and then having it recognize and then actually help you focus in a much more aggressive way. Whereas an SLR back in the day, I would just set up a single point. Realistically, for most wildlife, I would set up single point, place my subject in the middle, and if I needed to change the composition, I would just crop later to move the subject around a little bit within the composition. That's always the classic way of doing it. For me, it's meant doing this is much easier, much easier than it used to be, bird photography. So this is still not too far from home. I mean, the previous shot of the orangutan was in my local zoo. It's 10 minutes away. This one is technically still hometown. It's within the metro area. We're not moving too far away. It's an egret, so pretty straightforward. Long lens. Generally, as you might imagine, very beneficial to have much longer glass for this type of photography. Egrets tend to be more calm around people. So even though it's still actually pretty far away, this is actually over water. So I had to shoot from the opposite bank of a lake to get this picture. So long lens, very beneficial for something like that. Or smaller birds are always the most challenging, just because they tend to be super nervous. So this one let me hang around for longer than normal. And that's the only reason I got a few sharp pictures of this little sparrow, because they tend to be flying away very rapidly when people get too close to them. This one is a little bit farther away, so it is a wildlife refuge. It's about an hour drive, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit. So it's a little bit farther away, but we're starting to migrate a little bit further away from downtown. But to birds of literally a different feather. For me, this is always very difficult because it is my favorite subject. I love airplanes. It's true. I think all my coworkers by now know this. But to actually take pictures at my own home air show during Fleet Week, very difficult traditionally, because that would mean I'm not working a weekend in late September or early October. And that's usually very unlikely. It'll probably be unlikely again this year. I don't know if I'll be able to make it this year. But longer zoom lenses are super practical. So for me, it's something I love. Am I able to travel and do this? I would love to, but super difficult because it's a timing thing. These things happen in certain places at certain times. And if you're not traveling there specifically for that, you might miss it. This is still home. So this is the old city. This is the old city hall right across the way, because I used to go there for Toastmasters, because they made me go there because it's like, well, you need to become a better speaker. This is what we recommend. So do Toastmasters. So I did that for many years. And the local group I met with was in the old city hall, and this was just across. I used to carry my camera everywhere because I needed to practice like all the time to get halfway decent with photography. So this is an old lens, old camera, but doesn't matter. But again, it's a good example of subject matter that looks more interesting because we have shadows. And we're only going to get those shadows if it's a brighter, sunnier day. So cloudy day, you're just really not going to see this. It's not as interesting. But anytime you have columns, you can absolutely play with that. And throughout the day, it'll be kind of swinging around a little bit like a sundial. So you might get some interesting compositions. This is the first place I played with, and it was smart of me at least. Let's experiment at home. When I first started learning how to use a tilt shift lens. And this is a side of a parking garage that has interesting artwork. I just literally went back there a few weeks ago with a very different lens to do some different types of shots. But being home lets you experiment with things that maybe you're less comfortable with. Because I don't recommend lugging gear that is super nichey. That's heavier, more expensive, a long way if you're not comfortable using it already, just to experiment. I wouldn't recommend that. It's better to experiment at home. Pick something, a subject. It doesn't have to be fancy. So this is kind of unusual and a little bit fancier. It doesn't have to be that. But use a lens, and these lenses require usually practice to get more comfortable with them. Use them close to something home, and then you get more comfortable with it. And then that way you're not as nervous using it when you're traveling. And then same subject. Actually, it's just around the corner. The whole two sides of the parking garage are covered with multiple installations that they're all unique. So this is a different one, and that's okay. And with a much more modern lens, that's super telephoto. It's exactly the opposite. Instead of being a wide angle tilt shift, it's a super telephoto lens that is for mirrorless mount. Very different, but abstraction. I think that's the thing that I would always encourage. If you get bored, it's like, I've taken a picture of this thing before, right? So what do I do different? One of the things you can try, especially if you've only used standard or wider lenses before, would be telephoto. So if you use telephoto, you can get some interesting composition by just picking parts out of a larger subject matter. You can always play with that. It's a great way to experiment. So the second half of this is really about things that are more of a day trip. So that I'm gonna leave it there, and then that way it'll encapsulate things like a Bay Area, like something like this. This is not your normal picture, of course. So this is a good example of if I had to scout this because what I really want are the painted ladies. So painted ladies are they're old Victorians that are pastel painted, and people actually live in them. These are not like tourist houses or anything like that. People actually live in these houses. You're seeing the wide point of view. So because you have a juxtaposition. That's what always has made this a classic postcard picture. You juxtapose something old, 19th century, original construction, Victorian, that's in your foreground, with something new, and that is the modern skyline, which looks different than when I lived in San Francisco many years ago. And it's you got a few more tall buildings back there. But Scouting Head's important because it's in a park, so it is in green space. So when I scouted ahead, it's like, I see what road it's on, but when I lived in San Francisco, I never visited there. So I had no idea exactly where this was. And then it's like, well, wait a minute. If you need to have downtown in the background, I need to stand in a park somewhere. So it'll be green space. And it's like, well, don't really know where I can stand. And San Francisco is quite hilly. So those of you who visited will know this or have lived here will clearly know this. It's quite hilly in many, many places. And you might not be sure about exactly how you can position your camera to get the viewpoint you want. So it's always good to have some flexibility. So I specifically brought a zoom, a standard zoom, so I could cover my bases because I'm not exactly sure how to frame the subject matter. This is literally the classic postcard shot. It just looks a little different than one you might have gotten like 30 years ago. It looks different because some of the skyscrapers on the far upper right, they just weren't there. They literally were not there 30 years ago. Just the Transamerica Pyramid was there. That's the classic view of it. But classic postcard shot. Yes, has someone else done it? Of course. Someone else has done most everything. So it's no surprise there. But in terms of like, I want to find it because I want to do it myself. It's like, I want to visit it too. I want to kind of check it out. And I want to get a good picture while I'm there. Why not? So doing a little bit of scouting is going to be very helpful. I literally had to rip this one out of the archives because it's been so long. And yes, that is the actual lens I use. This is a really old lens now. So this is EF mount 16-35 2.8 version 2. This is not even version 3. This is version 2 because that's how long ago I took this particular picture. Nothing fancy going on. So this one, it's not sunrise, it's not sunset, there's no fog. Fog can be really cool with the subject matter, but then that's timing. And because I don't live in San Francisco like I used to, it's much harder for me because it's basically a 2-hour drive one way just to get there. So it's a lot harder for me to position myself to be there for specific weather. And oceanside weather is, as you might imagine, difficult to forecast. So I don't have a lot of the fancier pictures out of this. Always the ones you want, the locals, the ones that live, especially in Marin. So if you live in Marin, somewhere like that, it makes it much easier. You just look at the forecast the night before, and you get a good idea of what the clouds might be the morning after. But sunrise with some kind of marine layers, the classic, even best shot, because you get some funny business happening in the foreground that looks really cool. Classic picture. But what if you want something different? What you see different is in the thumbnail on the bottom left. So long lens, I always knew you could get this, much harder now, but it's an opportunity to see a portion, not all of it, but a portion of Golden Gate, but with a good chunk of Bay Bridge behind it and also downtown San Francisco. The only way to do that is to take the normal kind of road you take to the normal point, and take all of these pictures from the north side of the bridge and just keep driving. So I just keep driving. So I'm not sure exactly where to place myself on the road. There are a bunch of turnouts. So there are a bunch of places you can take pictures. But kind of simulation tools you have online don't do a good job of giving you an idea of exactly where you need to be. So again, it's a little bit of exploration, but at least I got the right road. It's a road I'm already used to. You just keep driving. And so when I did this picture, I just had to keep driving until you get a better angle. But I already knew I had to use a long lens because you have a completely different viewpoint you want to frame something far, far in the background, and that is the faint hazy thing way in the background. That's a bridge. That is Bay Bridge. And that's way, way in the background. So an alternative point of view, it is not normal. It is not your normal postcard point of view, but it's a good example of a subject that a lot of people may be familiar with, especially visually. If you've never been to San Francisco, it's so iconic. But a different point of view, especially if you're a little bit more local, you have some time to explore and use a different lens. So using long lens instead of a standard or a wider lens, it gives you this opportunity. This one was super hard. So this one was, it's the thumbnail you see on the bottom right. So what if you want, and it's not fakery, it's the kind of the wild thing, but it almost looks like it's fakery. Is that building actually there? It's like, couldn't you just draw it in? I guess you could these days with all these fancy tools, but it's not. It's actually there. It's a clock tower on the campus of UC Berkeley. And there's a way of generating it if you are standing in exactly the right spot somewhere in Berkeley Hills, kind of above and to the east of UC Berkeley campus. This is what it looks like because why is it cool? And it's cool because you can get Golden Gate through fog, and it's almost always through fog, way in the background. So it is a unusual point of view for sure. It's again green space, which means the best I could do for virtual scouting was I picked a parking lot where I could park and then start hiking around because that's really what it was. I park there. I'll bring everything I need. I know I need a long lens, so that's what I brought. And then I'll just keep hiking until I find the right spot. So the right spot is about like a 10-foot radius circle you could stand in back in the day. I've not been back there in years, so I don't know if it's possible based off of how the trees have grown. Because it's a very, very tight little window you have to shoot through between tree branches to get this point of view. And it is legitimately what it looks like. I didn't remove anything. So that's actually what it looks like. So quite cool. Palace of Fine Arts is still San Francisco. So this is because I love architecture. That's the other thing I quite enjoy. It is something that it's kind of a community center in terms of lots of events are done there. It's also a place where a lot of commercial photo and video shoots are done. Weddings are done, quinceañeras. The last time I was there at quinceañera, was doing stuff right there while I was there, and that's fine. The space is used a lot. So for me, I was just personally interested in architecture, and that means you just got to find some place to stand. And then also for me, it means I don't care to see lots of other tourists, including other tourists taking pictures with their phones. So go there late. That's my way around that. Were there still people there? Yes. There are a few other photographers that are hardcore. There's me and a few more tourists walking around, and that's it. And that's a good thing. So oftentimes I'm just avoiding it. And of course, when they first came out with 11-24, you had to do this, of course, because every other lens was either a fisheye, which it sort of looks okay, but it's still a little bit different, and it'll warp it a little bit, especially in the corners, or it's like it's not going to be as wide, and you can't get this picture. The building does light up this way, so the lights do light up this kind of an amber, orange, yellow. And architecture, this is what I find interesting. So if you are interested in doing architecture, I would always be interested in how a building lights up at night with its own lights, because if they light up certain colors like this, it plays very well against blue hour. And so I went back summer morning before sunrise, blue hour, because using a wide lens, and then if someone's like walking by anywhere close to you, their head will pop in the frame. So a little bit annoying. So a lot less crowded at like 5 a.m. in the morning than it would be at sunset, after sunset, like 9 p.m. after sunset. So much easier to get this picture. City Hall. City Hall can be challenging. You can kind of virtually scout it. I didn't intend to go take pictures of it. Usually on this particular night, I did not. It's more of a happenstance. Parking is always like super challenging. And then I'm too lazy to remove all the cars and the charter buses and all that stuff. So it is what it is. But sometimes you can see things that are a little bit different. So this is not normal lighting for it. So this is kind of the multicolored rainbow pride lighting they had up for it for the night, but something a little bit different. And that's always cool. And then I just happen to have a tilt shift. People always ask about that. It's like, do you carry around a lot? Yeah, I do carry around a lot, but not always. Never know when it comes in handy. This particular location is weird looking. And is honestly, it doesn't look like a city hall. So moving farther south now. So this is San Jose. And I pre-scouted it and I asked a local photographer, it's like, what should I bring? And he told me, it's like, bring a 17 tilt shift because it's very hard to get framing. So this is again back in the day without a wider lens than 14 millimeter, and 14 millimeter is not wide enough for this particular subject because you can't back up. You literally can't back up enough in order to get this framing, and that's really the whole point of it. And then it's the tilt shift that's keeping the sides of the building straight instead of like a pyramid. And that's the whole point of a tilt shift. So I'm backed up against the sidewalk that's right onto a fairly large boulevard street that's busy. So just in this case, I knew what to bring. And that's the only reason I brought it. Cool and iconic, but if I see this, I already know, hey, it's San Jose, California, right? A bunch of coworkers came in to help me with an event. This is many, many years ago now. Another classic example of just standard lens because you never know what kind of composition you'll get. So I would go standard or longer. And then because it's the middle of the day, all the other types of pictures are kind of boring. So you might as well just go for the shadows. So because of the architecture of this particular building, it's still the same building. So just you're walking inside of it, literally, the exterior space of this building. Totally playing around with these shadows because that's one of the cool things you can always do with architecture. So this one was during COVID when I got bored of staying at home. I decided to take a weekend off in this Mount Shasta reservoir. So it's Moss Spray Falls. This one required substantial scouting. I personally really enjoy waterfalls, so that you'll see many, many more in the August session because I've traveled extensively in the Pacific Northwest, so Oregon and Washington State, and there are more waterfalls in those two states than the rest of the country combined. So you got lots and lots of waterfalls. So this is the watershed for Mount Shasta, which is technically an active volcano. It's the biggest volcano in California. And this one required huge amount of kind of research. I was pretty shocked by how much it's like, hey, I love waterfalls. This one looks gorgeous. It's the prettiest waterfall, I think, in California. But getting there, not so easy. So it's one of those things you have to scout it and then you have to find some place to park because basically I'm parking in a tiny, tiny little town's residential streets. And you don't want to get in trouble or towed or parking tickets. And then I have to find a trailhead. It's not really a trailhead even. That takes you onto technically not public land. You will find out all these things if you do all the proper research and then you walk around, you walk along active railroad tracks. So super careful. You have to be really careful with anything like that. I was not the only one doing it, so it's just a popular destination for anyone in that kind of an area, just because it's much cooler here than if it's 100 degrees outside, it'd be 20 degrees cooler, easily 20, 25 degrees cooler right here. So coming back in the morning, I actually pre-scouted in person the day before and then came back the next morning when there wouldn't be anyone around. Otherwise, just you'd be filled with people. The reason I brought this lens, so some people do ask, it's like, is it intentional you brought this? Because it's really more of a wedding lens. Let's be realistic. It's more of a wedding and portrait style lens. I would personally use it for wedding because it's pretty spectacular wedding lens. But why'd you bring this one? It's because I wanted to bring one lens. I wanted to test it, first of all. And then when it was brand new. And then I want to bring a lens that also would be one lens that I could use for this as a standard zoom, but also for night sky. But then the clouds were very uncooperative the whole trip. So no night sky or Milky Way, even though it's quite dark, just way too many clouds, couldn't see anything. And then this one, super basic. So the lens is not expensive. Back in the day, this is a 2-lens kit for a Rebel way back in the day, the 55 to 250. And then the people always ask, oh, we set up fancy lighting. No, I didn't set up fancy lighting. So what's your background? The background's the ceiling of my kitchen. That's your background. And it's just happened to be visiting a home. And it's like, wow, you've got a gorgeous, unusual colored flower here. Can I take a picture of it? I wish I had a tripod. I don't. I have a Rebel with a couple of lenses and that's all I have. Do the best you can. And that is kitchen lighting basically in the background. And the whole thing's kitchen lighted. That works. So kind of start wrapping up here. Next time, just to give you some idea. So next time I'll talk about things that are progressively moving farther away from home. And that's kind of the what you see going on here. So you see a bunch of Yosemite pictures. Big Sur is Central California coast. So showing you a bunch of pictures there. Eastern Sierra Nevada, that's longer. These are longer drives for me. And then mostly day trips, or you're staying overnight. If you're trying for morning, like sunrise or evening sunset, then it's usually you're overnighting somewhere because it's a really super long drive for me now. And then some other big cities, including New York City, for me would be more of a tourist destination, even though I've been there many, many, many times. Okay. So that's kind of a preview of the August session. And then kind of at this point, open up for questions if there are any remaining questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. There was so much in there that I wasn't expecting. I want to thank you for going that direction because I think when we're so used to travel photography workshops and they all kind of go the same direction, it's like everybody pulls out their most exotic places as far away as possible. I'm over here like taking notes because, I think it's something that's changed since 2020. Like you said, a lot more people are taking weekend trips. People are taking.
So there was that.
Yep. I wasn't expecting. I want to thank you for going that direction. Do we get something pop? All right, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if we were getting a question in. But yeah, I mean, I'm taking notes over here on some of these locations that I'm over here. Like a lot more people are taking weekend trips that are nondescript places, not necessarily all the popular places. So I want to throw that out to you first of all, because that was such a direction I totally did not expect, and to see the Canon Rebel still in 2024 going strong and getting some love in there was another little added bonus. So
I still run into, it's like just even this past weekend, I've run into customers. That's still the camera they have. I ran into a lady with a Rebel T1i. Okay, it's been many years even since I've seen a T1i personally. It's like I have to look at the battery. It's like I can't remember what battery you use in this camera because it's been so long, but it's still what this person was using. Just because it's for a lot of people, it's a big investment. I totally get it. They're spending a lot of money and I want to keep it. And I'm gonna keep it for a long time. And it's okay. And I don't want to, this is one of the biggest things I have is I don't want to make people feel bad because they don't have expensive gear. That's never the point. It's like you can do so much with relatively basic gear. It's all relative, of course, relatively basic gear. And then that's why I want to show different examples, especially with inexpensive lenses. You can do lots of good things with things that are relatively inexpensive. There are some new cameras that can help you if you really enjoy certain things. So if you love wildlife, this is why exactly people are buying a lot of the mirrorless cameras. It's like, oh, what's all this animal focusing stuff I hear about? And then you start looking at videos. It's like, wow, that's amazing. I can do that. I could never do that before. It's like, true, with me too. That's why I had to take this stuff out the test. I can never do that before. It's like, I got to try it. Like literally, I got to go to the zoo. I can't travel very far right now. I'll go to the zoo because it's COVID. I'm going to try this right now because I've never seen a camera do that before. So I've got to experiment with it. But yeah, like you don't have to go to something exotic. I mean, yes, if you're doing some fancy, you always see these crazy pictures. Like, oh, I went to Patagonia. Oh, I went to Iceland. And now I'm not going to show you any of that stuff. You don't have to go to somewhere super crazy fancy. There's stuff all around you. I would just take a second look and take advantage of it. Because oftentimes people just overlook literally what's in their backyard. They completely overlook that.
Totally. I've been to probably half the places in California that you were shown, or areas, not, and I'm like, number one, the shots, I hate to admit it, that there was shots there that I'm like, man, I didn't look up, or I didn't look over and or go from this direction. In Sacramento, I went to Sacramento when I was years and years ago, but didn't know about the bridge. The bridge it wasn't the top thing. I'm thinking everybody's thinking the Capitol and this and that. So no, definitely. I wanted to call that out. And even I think you made a great point about the gear is even going back, my first real camera. I had an SX10 bridge camera. That's what really got me going. Those are probably this. I think that has its own like kind of like niche group of like people who are like the power shot group. It has like a cult following. So I was part of it, and it got me then into a Rebel XSI. And so it's like, but you even look at those and it's like, even now, it was fully capable then, which means it's fully capable now. I still would probably take one of the first DSLRs over using a phone. I just find there's just something to it, the quality of it and the experience overall. So it's great to see you go. You kind of went around the dial on lenses. You had some classics in there, the 16 to 35 2.8. I was waiting to see that in there. That that was like the early Instagram days when everybody really started getting into photography. Everybody in New York had a 16 to 35. So man, that was a trip down memory lane for me, mixed in with a lot of more current stuff. Andrew, what's it looking like over there on the YouTube side? We have any questions come in on
We only had one question on the chat. Someone asked, how much time did it take to do the research for the Golden Gate Bridge?
Oh, Golden Gate Bridge. So I get to talk about it because it's relatively local subject that a lot of people around the world will recognize, even if you've never been there, or you may have a trip, you decide to visit San Francisco in the near future, or maybe it's someplace you visited in the past, but you like to come again at some point with family or friends. So I totally get that. But it gives me an opportunity to talk about it. The the classic places, I didn't even show you the other examples because we could do a whole episode on taking pictures of just that one bridge. There are many places to take a picture of the bridge. I showed you the first picture I showed you is the classic picture, and that is from Marin Highlands, north of the bridge. So for most people, it all mean you drive across the bridge going north, and then you take the first turnout. And then from there, it's just basically, if you come during summer season, it'll just follow the other tourists because a bunch of cars will take the same turnout. It's the first turnout on the right as you get off the bridge to the north. And then it's like just literally follow the traffic. And then everyone, you won't have any parking. I guarantee you, you won't have any parking. So hopefully it's like, oh, someone can drop you off. I've had people do that too. It's like, well, there's no parking. Can you just drop me off? It's like, okay, yeah, I'll drop you off and then I'll come back to pick you up later because it's impossible to find parking in a situation like that. That one does require quite a bit. So the modern tools, I need to be careful about Google and all of their trademarking. Like I say, that's why I can't show you actual Google kind of Street View. I would use Street View as much as possible, but that is what it sounds like. It's a tool that's designed to help you on roadway. So when you're on a roadway that a car can drive, you're getting a ultra wide angle point of view from the roadway. So as long as you know that's the case, it can at least give you the reason I use it is to see the look for obstruction. So if along the roadway I can see it's like I kind of want to stand somewhere near there. I don't know where yet. Is there something really tall that might get in my way if I'm exactly in this kind of an area? So that one did take quite a while. Usually, and when it involves a lot of green space, it's helpful to ask someone local that has a better idea of exactly where to go. Along the roadway, I can see and then you can kind of narrow things down quite a bit that way. That's my general suggestion. It's always hard if you don't know, and sometimes I go places, it's like I don't know anyone there. I literally don't, it's like, man, I want to check it out. It's like one of my bucket list things to do is always to do like you'll see it in the next episode. But I love the classic skyline picture for every city. It's so iconic. It's like, hey, this is skyline. I visited there. This is not someone else's picture. It's my picture. I'll figure out my own way. So a lot of times it's a game for me. It's like I'll figure out my way. I got to find out where it is. And once I'll just confirm with a local photographer, it's like, what do you think? So I also like, hey, I want a good skyline picture. There are a few different places. I've had places like that too. It's like, what would you suggest? And it's like usually most people suggest the same thing. And then it's usually some green space. You got to start walking around a lot. And that's always the trick about it. I'll do some New York stuff for you too. Next episode. It's like, yeah, that's where I would stand. Oh, well. But yeah, that can take quite a while. So that one, I would always just be safe. So that's kind of the thing I always wanted to mention because I'm more nervous now than I used to be. Carrying around a lot of heavy gear that's expensive, especially if you travel alone. It's always safer if you travel with a buddy. I would always describe it that way. If you have a buddy, it doesn't have to be even a photographer friend. If it is, that's great because you share a common interest. But even if it's your family, that's always hard with family because usually you're the one that's most interested in photography and they're kind of like, can we go yet? And, we want to go here, we want to do that. We're hungry, we want to do dinner. It's like, why are we still here? It's like, yeah, then you're always like, you feel pressured because you have all this external pressure with you. But always be safe, especially when it gets darker. And then some of these places, I'm not showing you, some of these places, I didn't show you that picture this time, but there is a classic city skyline shot of San Francisco where you have it's actually Treasure Island. I'll tell you, I don't mind telling you exactly where it is. It's Treasure Island. If you've ever gone there to take pictures, someone can completely sneak up behind you and you have no idea they're there because you can't hear things very well because the surf is so strong because you're basically standing right on top of the bay between the surf and the wind. actually can't hear someone walk up behind you in the dark, and you totally can't see them because it's actually really dark. You're away from the city, and the island itself is dark. So if people walk up on me, it's like it actually startled me because I didn't see them actually coming. So just be safe. Always be safe.
Definitely. And especially if you're from the East Coast like I am and you go to San Francisco. That's like the one thing that always jumps out. It's like, man, I was out taking pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge and I was like, you have all the signs around like don't lock your car, don't leave anything showing. I think increasingly now more than ever most camera systems now, the cost has gone up, more people are carrying more expensive gear, and because we want to, we're photographers, we, as much as someone might say just bring that one zoom lens, if you're like me, you're like, well, I might need to zoom into 600 millimeters on one thing maybe once, so I'm going to bring that lens no matter what. I feel like we always overpack. But if you had to, I'm going to ask you, Peter, what's your go-to travel setup? If you you can only bring one setup, one body, one lens, what are you bringing?
I'll tell you a story. I don't have a picture from this example. Maybe I'll add it to the next class. And, I might be motivated to do this. So the one time I travel, I don't like do it this way. I never do it anyway before. It was an overnight trip to Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was for work. So everything came in one backpack. So that means non-work shoes, non-work clothing, a
Oh,
camera,
man.
like literally everything, toothbrush, relatively small backpack. So I had room for one camera and one lens. So I went old school classic. I brought like an original 6D with a 24-70 f4. It wasn't even the 2.8 because the 20 was bigger. It was too big for my bag because I had all this other, spare underwear, everything in there, right? So it's like not big enough. So personally for me, I don't mind full frame. Okay, so a lot of people, I pointed out some options because I constantly get asked about it. It's like, hey, it's like my fill in the blank is too big. I don't want to carry that. I've done it for years, but I want something smaller. What do you have to offer? So I'm giving people some options in that direction. So if you want something small, go, all right, it's crazy small. It's shocking. It's like rebel. It's the weight of a rebel. It's just pretty shocking, right? But personally, I would today in this day and age, okay, yeah, I am that guy. I'll still bring like an R5 or R6 Mark II, something like that. I travel with full frame. And if I had to, I'll just still bring one lens. So if I had to only bring one lens, I am an old school classic zoom guy. So I will be a 24-70 person. I'll just do it that
Okay.
way. It's just super flexible. People will say it's boring. Okay, yeah, but it's like there's actually water. There's a water hazard in front of me. I can't really walk into it. So it's like I need to frame a certain way. So I always enjoy the flexibility. If you prefer primes, that's why I always give someone the option. So if I had to carry a prime, I'd bring a 35. That's like exactly what I said. I'd always bring a 35. And that was always the classic photojournalist prime lens to bring. If you only had one prime lens as a photojournalist to use, I would use a 35. I would always use a 35 because it gives you something a little bit wider when you need it. And that can be really hard not to have that. So not a 50. I would not actually personally bring a 50.
I can't complain. I can't complain with any of that. That was spot on. You passed the test. I think I'd probably bring the same, as long as I'm not, relegated to one backpack. That kind of scares me to go on a work trip with one backpack. But no, yeah, right. Ton of great information here. I want to thank Peter, Andrew, the entire team at Canon for hosting this event. And part two, I'm interested to see what you bring out for New York. Because I swear, if there's anything that I'm like, man, I might have to run out of here right after the presentation if there's something I haven't seen in my own city. I always love seeing an outside perspective because I think we all do this, right? We take for granted our own locations, our home cities, and we don't really explore them like tourists enough. So I'll be interested for that. A ton of great information today. So huge thank you again to Peter and Andrew for stopping in with some experience, information, and to all of our viewers out there. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Huge special thank you to Canon for hosting this wonderful series. That is all we have for now. Another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space in the books. Catch y'all next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.